Yes. Thank you everyone for being here. We are really, really grateful to have such a beautiful group for the first fireside. The beard is unkempt, but still working out. Thank you, John. And thank you everyone for the birthday wishes. It really means a lot. It really means a lot. And it means a lot to be with each of you today. It's a pleasure to be able to start my morning with fireside, especially with all of the happenings of the last 24 hours. The merge was a really beautiful culmination of at least 5 years of research, but if you go far enough back, 25 years of research. And so it's an incredible moment. We may have a sneaky guest come in that I don't know how to plan for, but we'll be on the lookout for in the case that it happens. It's kind of on the fence, but we have a wonderful guest, Niran Babalola, who has been in the Ethereum community since 2015. And so what we tried to prioritize on this day was this combination of kind of one, somebody who had been in the Ethereum world long enough to know about it, two, somebody who might help us think about what this moment means for the present and the future and the purpose of Ethereum, how it fits into that story. And I think three, for me, selfishly, somebody that I really wanted to spend time with, and Niran is in that category, and each of you is as well. So we're grateful. And Niran, just for your benefit, everyone here already knows this, but the group that's in Block 7 with us is another incredible group of writers and wordsmiths and technologists and musicians and artists and poets, and come from all sorts of backgrounds that are on this page and are well beyond this page. You'll see them in kernel Slack, and Niran is in Slack because he was with us in Genesis block, I believe. And Panvala, the project that he leads, has been closely intertwined and interconnected with kernel since the beginning. We're going to do this fireside like we do all firesides, which is a bit of words from Andy that introduce the part of the syllabus that we explore. This time we're on week 0, which in theory is called Introduction to Kernel. But we want to make it a bit broader given where we are in the history of Ethereum and Panvala. So Introduction to Trustful Spaces might be a more inclusive title for today's fireside. And a couple of ground rules before Andy speaks. He'll start speaking on this slide. I will predominantly be in the chat, and the chat is the priority in many ways. We will be looking at it often. We will use it as our guidepost, and almost every fireside, the ask is, can we save the Zoom chat and can we potentially do something with it? And that's because an incredible amount of links are shared, and your engagement in that regard is really beautiful. We have an hour and a half scheduled. We'll probably be done here in about an hour so that we have at least 20 minutes in the gather after to just kind of hang out. So relax, move around if you need to. Be sure to have your video on if you want to stay on and maybe on mute at some point, but also turn your video off and walk around and just enjoy the time here in any way that is meaningful to you. With that, I'll pass it to Andy to speak us through where we are in the kernel syllabus and to get us towards introducing Niran.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Happy birthday. Happy birthday. May it be another journey around the sun filled with love and light and peace and darkness. I am just enormously grateful to be here with you specifically, Vivek, and you generally, KB7. It's a really special time today in particular, but just this block in general has already been an amazing experience in many ways, and I look forward so much to the next 7 weeks exploring what is in front of you on this slide and in all of the fertile flower beds and cracks that we are opening up in between. As Vivek says, it's not just about kernel, it's about planting these delightful seeds for more human rhythms in all of the places that we find ourselves. There are so many people here who are a part of really amazing and incredible organizations doing the work of a beloved community, which is what Alison is talking about in that video. The words of Alice Walker, ring true. We are the people that we've been looking for. And when we really believe that and act from that place, then we are the beloved community. And it's this rainbow coalition of love, which is what that's whole kind of movement is about in the video that Vivek played first. So we begin with rainbows and the play of pattern, which today, if you just go back to the syllabus for one moment, the way that it is structured and the way that we think about weaving together this rainbow coalition of love is some personal set of questions each week, coupled with some Web3 set of questions. And you will see here that these two blend in ways which are highly intentional, right? We could, for instance, make trust the personal lesson and play of pattern the Web3 lesson. They kind of fit in both ways, and that is no mistake. Each week we will weave through some particular aspects of the Web3 mythos and culture that we have created over the last 10 plus years, and illustrates that it has a particular kind of grounding in our own experience every single time we look at these things. Even really seemingly complex topics like governance are actually deeply personal things. And so that's one of my favorite things to note about the structure of the syllabus, is that it works in these circles or these spirals that keep us coming back to the realization that, for instance, things like governance are actually personal topics. And this is what the play of pattern is all about. So in the next slide, we illustrate that what we're here to try and consider together and reflect on in our own experience is the understanding that you can't have one without the other. You can't have me without you. You can't have up without down, light without dark, north without south. None of these things make sense other than in relationship. So when we are aware of both ends of the spectrum, both opposing poles, and can hold those in mind generatively, then it's not just about this old and Western idea of negative capability, which John Keats, the poet, defined as the ability to keep both possibilities in mind without grasping after fact or certainty. It is something more like positive capability, the ability to assert contradiction as a ruling principle that must and can only be interacted with communally in order to become meaningful. This is an idea from Toni Morrison and some of the African American writers, and just African writers that I myself have spent a great deal of time with and whom I love deeply. The notion of call and response, of umuntu gumuntu gabantu, right? A human being is only a human being through other human beings. There is this possibility of real individuation, of being me uniquely, but that possibility is only realized in community. And so it's not just about keeping the opposing poles in mind, but it's the whole spectrum of possibility between, and seeing that this opposition is held in a deeper contradiction that is the heart of community life, that gives us the excuse to keep coming back to one another and asking questions of wonderful and amazing people like Niran, and being like, what is this thing that we are all doing here, and why does it matter, and what is the purpose of it? And to really enjoy those kind of explorations, because beneath it all is just this sense that it is such a blessing to simply spend time together. And when we know that, then we can understand a little bit more about trust. So in the actual module that we put out on the kernel syllabus, like trust has a whole bunch of stuff which is a little bit more technical, and is used as the primary illustration of this idea of complementary opposites, right? That in order to create protocols that are trustless and that enable us to enter into new kinds of trusting relationships with other human beings, we need to be able to define and encode what it means to cheat. This does not give us access to absolute truth, capital T. It gives us access to common knowledge, ways of establishing a shared set of rules that everybody follows in order to establish consensus, consensus then being the thing that allows for value and meaning to be distributed more widely. There is a sense of viris in numeris, strength in numbers, the ability not only to define clearly and succinctly the rules by which we engage in the world and have those be shared and verifiable, trust as in veritas in the world, but also the ability to rely on one another, to believe in one another, to know that we are the people that we've been looking for, that this is the beloved community. That is triova, the solid foundation upon which community life is enacted and enjoyed, that being the key term there. So all of this stuff, it's really wonderful. I love it. It's just I've learned it all from Niran, so it's really very cool because I get to just steal shamelessly from all of his incredibly inspirational and deep thoughts. It's honestly such a pleasure to have him back, to get to spend time with you exploring these ideas. Is one of the most happy and enjoyable things I get to do in all of Kernel, which is an enormously happy and enjoyable place for me. So I'm really, really grateful to have you with us. Vivek, if you have any other things by which we should shower Niran in praises before we ask him difficult questions, then please feel free.
I'll keep it brief for Niran's benefit, but there are few people in the Ethereum community that I feel that I've learned more from. I think that Andy and the work that he spent on the syllabus is one. Vitalik is another. Kia Kreutler from DAOs and Dragons, who will be with us in a future fireside, and Niran are really in that Mount Rushmore for me. And it has to do with my own particular interests, and my interests have a lot to do with trustful spaces and the ways that open and common knowledge and these public goods that we create might be happening through trusted spaces, right? Like these two things are not separate. And I think that somebody, I think it was, who was in the chat, who said, honor our boundaries, right? Play with boundaries, don't accept them, but honor them. And I think trusted spaces are a beautiful example of that, knowing that we cannot live in a trustless world. This is not, it's a sentence that doesn't make sense. And yet still, with the boundaries that sometimes trusted spaces require, we can do things that are boundless. And I think, speaking with Niran for even a few minutes will give you a sense that these paradoxes are things we can move with. And so I hope that that's a part of our exploration today, and we're really grateful to have you here,
Niran. Thanks for having me, and great to be here.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful stuff. So Niran, the first thing that I want to ask you is just to kind of briefly introduce your path into this wide and wonderful world of Web3, particularly because today is Merge Day and there is this sense of the historic. And for those who have not yet had the pleasure of meeting Niran, it is worth hearing this, particularly through the frame of, this next kind of step along the path, which is not, a radical shift, but one in a series of steps that has taken us quite a long way down a shared journey already. And I'd love just to hear and to introduce the folks in KB7 to you and your journey.
Thank you. So before I dive into my own story, first, I want to say happy Merge Day to everybody. Very momentous day. Happy birthday, Vivek. And also happy Kernel Block 7 Day to all of you who are here. Like, I'm so happy for you that you get to experience this thing, because I think Kernel is a very unique experience to go into. Most people, as they dive deeper into what's going on in Web3, their experience is cartoon apes, their experiences like speculating on the fanciest DeFi protocol, like talking about meaning, what it actually means for us to be here, how to explore this blank slate that this technology really is. like I think kernel is a special experience to be able to participate in. So you're definitely in the right place. So my story. I heard about this Bitcoin thing a little while back, and my friend's like, "Hey, you should look into this Bitcoin thing." And I'm like, "I've heard about this Bitcoin thing. Those nerds think they can create money from thin air. They don't know anything. It's silly. I'm going to ignore it." A year or so later, same friends like, "Have you read about this Bitcoin thing?" And I'm like, I guess I have to dive in and read about this Bitcoin thing. So I spend the next week of my life with my brain not under my own control. Literally, I have to go seek out every bit of information as I unpack what is actually going on here. I can't drop it. And at the end of that exploration, I'm like, these nerds can create money from thin air. This is the coolest thing ever. So I end up going down that rabbit hole and kind of learning everything that's going on there. A couple years later, I hear about another group of nerds. And this group of nerds is like, hey, we're going to put a programming language in our money, and it's going to be really cool. We think it's going to be like a world computer. And at that point, I'm like, I don't see how a programming language in your money makes it in any way a better digital gold. I think this is a scam coin. There are many scam coins. I'm going to ignore these nerds. Nerds is a term of endearment for me. I'm a nerd. It's not an insult, but they're nerds. They're definitely nerds. So I ignore it because I think it's a scam. I come across a project called Augur, which is a decentralized prediction market platform. And at the time, I was really excited about prediction markets. I'm not that excited about it anymore. It is fancy sports betting, political betting, all that stuff. It already exists, and yeah. But I was really excited about it. The idea that you could let people bet on the outcomes of future events and get a forecast effectively of those future events. It's the world, the image that came to mind was literally like the same way we have a weather forecast, having a forecast for the future for any kind of event you could imagine seemed pretty cool. So the fact that people were building a decentralized version that wouldn't get shut down by government because it's some form of gambling, et cetera, seemed really cool. So I started contributing to that project just as an open source contributor, and they happened to be using Ethereum behind the scenes. And it was really using the technology, again, not as someone who believed in the technology itself, but that was trying to solve a problem with it. That's what made it click to me what this technology could actually be. And again, this isn't the only definition of what it is, but this is the way I think about what Ethereum is. What you can do with Ethereum is write down the rules for any interactions between individuals or groups of people. Just write down the rules, like it's the rules to a board game where you pull out the instructions and all the rules are just written down. But instead of needing a game master for this game to enforce the rules for you, the Ethereum network is promising to be the impartial game master for any interaction between any groups of people. All you have to do is write down the rules, publish it, and the Ethereum network will enforce those rules. So at that point, it's like, well, if you can think of any better way for people to cooperate than the garbage fire that's happening outside in our society, you can probably just write down those rules. Again, you can't force people to follow them, but if you can invite them to follow them and play this game that you've written and it produces better cooperation than they're seeing out there, then you can just do that from your bedroom. You can write down a better way for the world to work, publish it to the network, recruit people to participate in that with you, and change the world. That is what I think is actually possible and is still possible to this day. So at that point, I had to drop everything that I was doing. I quit my job. I was like, oh, I hope I have enough savings because I have to work on this fantasy technology that can change the world. Searched for a place where I could actually work on this for a paycheck and came across Consensus, the company, and started working there for a couple of years. And again, like I think the experience of working at Consensus early on is similar to the experience of like going through kernel, because again, it's such a, at the time it was such a blank slate that really working with other people to try to orient and try to think through what it means to build in this space is really a lot of what was happening. And that's really a lot of what you get with kernel. So again, like I think what we have at our disposal is not just a tool for building cartoon apes that people speculate on, not just a tool for building a decentralized financial system, although that is very cool. There's nothing boring about that. That is very cool. But I literally think we have the tools to empower every single human being on the planet and give them more agency. Again, that doesn't mean that we can build a perfect world, but I do think that if you visualize what Ethereum is as just a fancy piece of paper, that is, it doesn't do anything on its own. It's kind of like that Zoom chat box at the side of this call. It doesn't do anything, but you can put stuff in it. You can't go back and change what's happened before, but each person on this call can put stuff in that Zoom chat box, and it takes on a life of its own. Again, if there are boring people on this call, that Zoom chat box is going to suck. But if there are people like you, there's going to be great conversation in that Zoom chat box. You decide what goes on there. Again, it's not, if you think about it as technology, the Zoom chat box doesn't do anything. It's you doing the thing. And that's literally what Ethereum is. It's a fancy sheet of paper. Anybody in the world can write to it. You can just add your own thing at the end. And the question is, what should we write to that? Like, what is it good for? What can we do for ourselves? What can we do for each other by coming up with new things that we can write to this fancy sheet of paper? The technology does nothing on its own. It's really about us coming up with what is a good thing to write to it. And I think you and I are going to do a lot of good work to figure that out and help other people figure it out as well.
Thank you so much. I love the story. I mean, every time I get lost in those dulcet tones coming from somewhere in Texas. What I want to kind of like explore here with you is that the Zoom chat box is an interesting analogy because I think you and I both think that technology is not neutral, although there is this openness to certain technologies, which is precisely, as you've said, about the invitation. And it's an invitation towards certain kinds of proclivities or certain directions that technology orients us in. And it seems like the orientation based on this story and the way that you perceive things is towards something more like common knowledge, right? So there's no like absolute truth that is established by some consensus mechanism between a network of peers running timestamp servers, but there is something like common knowledge which enables us to establish not just the kind of like fancy sports betting and political games that we've been through and profile pictures and the rest of the stuff that you've referenced, but something more like community life. And what you really touched on there, which is so important to me, is that like it's not about the technology as an end in itself, it's a means toward an end. And that end is something like living well together, broadly defined. And I really would love to hear your perspective on community life and why that has pulled you as a potentially valuable end outside of like the technology itself, using the technology to actually solve some stuff that you see in the world, not as an end in itself, is so interesting to me. And inviting others with you toward that common knowledge it's such a potent mix of stuff, and I'd love to hear more about it.
Yeah, so the community life, again, for me, my background, like, again, I self-identify as a nerd, like social stuff is not my expertise. I am not the party planner. I am not the social butterfly. But somehow, through my explorations of this technology, community life has come to the forefront of what we can actually enhance. And I don't think that's actually the easiest maxima. If you see all these like hills that we can climb in terms of what we do with this technology, I think enhancing community life is the global maximum. It's the highest point that we can get to. Again, my personal opinion. But the easiest point to get to is not that. The easiest point that you can get to is speculation, is trying to extract value from as many people as possible. Like if you see this as a tool for achieving some sort of collective meaning, the easiest collective meaning to reach is let's get rich together. And that's why you see that all over the place. The core thing that that Ethereum does differently that the rest of the internet couldn't do before is property. You could not own property on the internet in a way that without literally some entity saying you own this domain name, and then we're going to get everybody else to agree that these are the domain names. That is one kind of property that you had, but you couldn't create new forms of property and say you literally own this thing because the internet says so. But that's what we have today. And if you went back and talked to someone in the year 2000 about like owning digital things on the internet, it would seem fantastical and weird, but that's literally what we do. You probably have an NFT somewhere in your wallet, or whether or not it's worth anything, who knows, some cryptocurrency. Like, we're living in a weird version of the future from the perspective of 15-year-old me. But like the property has its own inherent logic, especially given the pathway that we've come through as a society. The way that our society thinks about property is not the only way to think about property, but it is the most viral way to think about property. The idea that the early adopters, if you get a piece of property and people come in after you, make a lot of money. I happen to live in Austin, Texas, where that is also the logic of our city, where if you get in early enough and buy a house, and then everyone else in the country thinks it's the hottest city in the country for some reason, they'll come in after you, and then your house will be worth a lot of money. Like that form of property, that logic of property, is kind of the predominant one in our society. So the idea that this technology leads us on a path to more communal thinking is not inevitable. I think it's much easier to have the sort of hyper capitalism that people fear. And again, I'm not in any way against capitalism. I think capitalism is fantastic. That might be controversial, but it has some problems that we're going to fix. But like, I'm not anti-capitalism, but I think that's what by default, what you end up getting. So the reason that I think you can get to community life as the focus of what gets enhanced by this, rather than just new forms of property, rather than just individual wealth, is because, again, I think if we can find the story to tell to get to that shared meaning, it's harder to achieve that shared meaning, because again, it's not baked into our culture already. There's no story that we tell ourselves about how achieving things for our community is the highest purpose or something along those lines. That's not the story our society tells. Our society says, hey, do what you can to be as productive as possible, to make as much money as you can, to get as much property as you can, and then to never have to work again. That's a story that we tell. And even in crypto, like, you might hear the term generational wealth thrown around a lot. Like, that's what people are talking about. They're talking about amassing property so they never have to work again. They're not talking about how they can fulfill their community's ambition for the world that they can live in. But if we collectively can come up with a better story to tell to achieve that kind of shared meaning, that is something that I do believe is possible. So again, it's not necessarily good, it's not necessarily a better thing to achieve, but my standpoint is that the best thing that we can achieve for other people is to give them agency, to give them the ability to not just have freedom to say what they want to say, to do what they want to do, but to also have the power to make the world shape a little bit more closely to the way they want. And our society right now, especially from my standpoint in America, is not a high agency society. People feel like their society is rigid, that their hopes and dreams for the way their communities, their families, etc., can interact with the broader world out there, they don't feel like they can change that. They get angry. A lot of people want to burn the whole thing down. Some people want to go to an imagined past of a better, the way things were. Some people are like, hey, the past was terrible. We need to tear things down to get to some magical, better future. But again, the predominant feeling that I feel from other people is, let's tear things down. And that's not a good place to be. I don't want to be in that spot. I don't want anybody to tear anything down. I want to build up with as many people as possible. And I think the way to get to a society that wants to build up is for everyone to feel like they get to shape what we're building. Everyone to feel like they have agency, everyone to feel like their vision of a better world It's something that is part of the emergent whole that we're building. So that's why I believe that if we can tell a better story about how we do things collectively, about how our communities work, about how our communities do things together, that we can achieve something better than just that default story about like, let's make ourselves wealthier. If we can make other people wealthier, if we can make other people more powerful, I think we all end up better off at the end of the day, not just because other people are happier, but also because like me giving you more agency to make the world more like what you want means that you're going to find things that I would have never found. You don't have the same brain as me, you don't have the same story as me, but sometimes other people that I might disagree with come across something new, something that works. Like agency is not just a gift for the person who receives it. Agency is a gift for everyone else who gets to see how you used your agency. I want you to have a stage to do things the way that you want, so I can see that, so you can enjoy your own thing, but also so I can see what you're doing and say, oh, I'm going to copy a lot of that in my own community with the people that I like doing things with. Agency is a gift for us all.
Yes, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Niran, just have to pause us for a moment because we're getting to that first moment in a kernel fireside where the chat is popping off and the ideas have been flowing from many of the things that you've said. There's a lot of double tapping on agency and some questions around, how that is defined. Some beautiful questions from slightly prior that might be related to what you say just now about, everyone's going to have different rules, but there was an explicit question for you on, like, what are the shared fictions that you currently believe in? What fictions are you using to create the rules for your communal space? I know we haven't gotten there quite yet for Panvala, but maybe there's some way that you can weave agency, which is clearly something important to you, and into how that fits with your shared fictions. Some double tappings on your capitalism statement, and I think a lot of noticing that you're saying community and capitalism a lot. This seems interesting. What's going on here? So there's that, and I suppose I should pause there, unless Niran, you feel like I could continue. There are at least 2 or 3 other threads, but I wanted to first, for the kernel fellows, say we know this happens on these calls, lots of ideas flowing. Try to make sure your attention is gathered, and maybe that's through Zoom chat, maybe it's closing it for a second to listen to Niran and coming back to it. Just find a good balance between the 2. But Niran, please go ahead.
Sure. So to get to that sort of shared fiction, that story that we tell that I think can like lead to a better world. Again, since this technology is such a blank slate, since the moment that we're at can go in so many different directions, there is not one answer. Like literally the opportunity for you is to find your meaning, to find your answer, and find as many people as you can to organize with to make that real. Like that's the opportunity that's there. But I'll tell you a little bit about the story in my head, the world that I daydream about and that I desperately want to live in. I can tell you a little bit about that. So basically, the world that I want to live in is a world where many of the problems that we expect governments to solve today are problems that people can solve as communities. That is not necessarily getting everyone or a majority of the people in your society to agree that a problem is both important and to agree that a particular solution is the right solution, but to be able to come together with the people you agree with, the people you like spending time with, and to be able to solve problems with those people. I think that is a better framing for the way we could interact as a society. But to actually get that, our communities would have to have vastly more resources at their disposal. And that's not the way our economy works today. That's why capitalism comes up a lot in the discussion, not because capitalism is bad, but because our particular structure just is not well suited to community solving problems. It's well suited to, in my opinion, 2 things. If you can start a business that solves problems for lots of people, our current system will help you do that, and it does it well. And that's good. If you can find a way to get people to pay you to solve a problem, I totally support that. The other way that we solve lots of problems is by, taxing people and then getting the government to solve problems. And that is also good. I've been to places that don't have functioning governments that can tax people and solve problems. I don't want that. So I am pro-government. I am not a anti-government kind of guy. But with those two solutions as the main things like that, we run up into lots of barriers. Maybe the thing that you want to do doesn't make money. Maybe the thing that you want to do doesn't have 51% of the whole country, the whole city, the whole state, whatever it is, to agree with you. And that's why I think we need much more of a focus on voluntary communities as the way we can solve problems. So the question becomes, like, how do we get communities more resources? Like, how do we go beyond just digging in our own pockets and saying, hey, I'm going to support this community I care about, which can work very well. There's many thriving community groups out there that run on contributions of their members, whether it's nonprofits, whether it's clubs, whether it's churches, whatever it is. Like, there's many communities that thrive based on the contributions of their members. But what if there were also an opportunity to rewire the way our economy works to have value flow to our communities by default, and to feel as if there were some sort of endowment that any community could draw from, this shared wealth that you have a piece of that you could take to a community of your choice and solve problems in that way? That's the kind of world that I want to build, where you feel like you, rather than having a vote that you can take to any candidate you want, you have resources that you can take to any community you want. That's what we're organizing to build. So what Panvala, the project that I work on, I don't want to give a pitch necessarily, but just kind of ground the vision and what we're actually doing. What it is a mass movement to dramatically increase the budgets of every community across our society. And what we see is every marketing dollar spent in our economy as a dollar that can and should flow to communities that their customers are in. Those dollars should not flow to Google or Facebook. Those dollars should not make Mark Zuckerberg richer and richer so he can buy more of Hawaii. Those dollars at the end of the day are spent to change my behavior and your behavior. So we buy a certain thing, so we go to a certain place. Like we control our own behavior, so we can probably control where those dollars go, not as individuals, but if we organize together and say, hey, we are going to shift where every marketing dollar goes in our economy, I believe that there's a path to get that done. And it's also something that has been done before. So if you have ever heard of the program Box Tops for Education, which if you are an American millennial, you probably have. But for people who aren't, there's a cereal company called General Mills, and they want parents to buy their cereal. And when you walk into the grocery store, there's all these cereals on the shelf. They want parents to ignore 90% of those cereals and buy their cereal. So the way they get that done is they say, hey, parents, if you buy our cereal and you cut off the top of the box, that cardboard, piece of cardboard at the top of the box, take it to your kid's school, we will count up all the box tops at every school in the country and fund schools based on those box tops. So what they're doing is they're saying, hey, we're gonna give the control of our marketing budget to our customers to take to a community they wanna make an impact in. And that's how we're gonna get customers. It works, and we believe that it's kind of revolutionary. That's how every dollar in our, every marketing dollar in our economy should flow. It should flow to your community the way that it does when you collect those box tops. So that's really what we organize communities to do. Instead of thinking about that box tops kind of program as something that a company does, a marketing program for a company, we want to flip it around. We want you to see it as a movement of communities that are getting companies to offer them value through something similar to those box tops. We call them stamps. They are NFTs that any company can mint and offer to their customers as a way to get them in the door. So again, we're organizing a mass movement of communities to both go out and collect stamps from doing business with existing sponsors, and to put pressure on the existing economy to get all the other companies that they already do business with to offer that value back to them in the form of stamps. It's not that we're going to make decisions about what we buy based on ads or based on what company the sports stadium is named after. It's that, hey, me and my community, we're going to go to the places that can give us as many stamps as we can get, because that's what funds the events that we put on. That's what funds the grants that we give out. That's what helps us solve the problems that we see in our society. We want every community in our society to be collecting stamps the same way that every kid was collecting those box tops, where it was just kind of part of the culture, where so many people that you talk to, if you're like, hey, did you ever collect box tops? So many people say yes. And we want that to be the case for our whole economy. We think that we can literally shift every marketing dollar to fund communities in that way. So if you can see that happening, then you can see a piece of that vision, that you do have an endowment that you can take to any community you want. It's your stamps, it's your box tops. You can take those anywhere you want to improve the quality of life in any community you choose, or to solve the problems that you see that you don't have to get everybody to agree, but you take it to a community you already agree with, and you say, hey, here are more resources to solve the problem in our way. Let's go get it done. That is the rough sketch of the world that I dream about, the world that I want to live in, and the world that I want to help you live in, not because your community is going to do the things the way that I want to be done, but because I want you and your community to have that agency, not just the freedom to say, hey, we can speak, or no one's stopping us from doing the thing that we want, but actually being empowered with the resources to get that done. That sort of agency is something I want for you and for all human beings.
Yeah. If I could, a couple more from the chat, and then we'll make sure we come back to Andy, because I know we wanted to finish there. On what you just said, Niran, there's some questions about these different types of communities and the challenges of making sure that communities, not only the ones that have money to begin with, benefit. So that's kind of like one part. But then a couple of other things just on communities. One from Shui Jing, who's working on some research on this, was, do you think boundaries are important for communities? And beyond privacy and IP, could you speak a bit about boundaries? And yeah, just kind of like exploring like different communities that you could imagine using Panvala. There was a question about if these are tools to build communities with deeper values. I know, Niran, in the past, I've heard you speak about the fact that it is for all communities. And so curious your take on that and how that all flows with agency.
Yeah, so for me, like if communities grow deeper values, I think that's great. If communities come together to throw massive ragers that have no inherent value at all, to me, that's also fine. Because at the end of the day, agency is the name of the game. Like, I don't necessarily want to control how you use your share of these collective resources that I think our movement can help you access. I just want you to have it and to be able to make your own choices. I do think throwing massive ragers will get old very quickly. So I think people will do it, but then they'll be like, what is the meaning in my life? And then when they reach a certain age, it's like, well, do I want my children to grow up just attending these massive ragers and that's all we do together? Like, I just think people will tend to like, I think value and meaning are kind of inherent human needs, not just individually, but just collectively. And once you become more than just an individual human, once you like get married, have kids, etc., it becomes more important over time. So I think it's easy to see like a whole bunch of 20-somethings throwing massive ragers with the stamps that they collect. I could see that happening, and I wouldn't be surprised if it does, but I just don't think it would sustain itself. I don't think you can build a thriving, living community off of that. So I do think people would grow deeper values, not because I tell them to, but I think that's just the emergent order. I think people like meaning and value. There was another part that I wanted to touch on, but I'm forgetting what
boundaries.
So making sure that the value doesn't just go to people who are already rich. So that's a very interesting point, because again, the model that I've described to you, if we're shifting the marketing dollars that are spent to get your business into your control to take to the community you want, marketing dollars are spent roughly proportional to how much money you have to spend. So the default thing that emerges from what I've described to you so far is actually the communities of the wealthy having more resources to spend on their own communities, and the communities of people who aren't as wealthy having more resources than they have today, but proportionally to their buying power in the economy. So that is by default. If that's the only thing we do, it is kind of a, you could say, bias towards the wealthy. But again, as a movement, we don't have to just let the emergent order take hold. This is a thing that we govern ourselves. So if you imagine a federation of communities that are part of this movement, governing that movement themselves and saying, hey, we don't want that to be what plays out. We don't want just the richest people to have very wealthy communities that have all the resources at their disposal while people who are less wealthy don't. We can say, hey, we do want some form of redistribution. It's just that you can't force redistribution because it's a voluntary system. So it has to be something that's built from the ground up where there is consent for that sort of redistribution. And I do think that's a thing that will happen because, again, I think one kind of innate human thing is a tendency to want fairness, and that's not even just a human thing. They find it in animals and all sorts of things too. Like people want fairness. So like I do think as this plays out, putting policies in place in our voluntary movement to kind of make sure that the value that our movement is putting in the hands of people doesn't all accumulate with the people that already have the most is something that we would need to do. But again, it's not just based on wealth, it's also based on productivity over time. And that's kind of something that I think communities will want to encourage. They'll want to encourage their communities to be more productive so they do have more buying power, so they can collect more stamps and fund their communities in that way. And I think that is good. I think productivity is good. I think work is good. Like I don't think that I don't think it's bad for people who produce more to get more. It's just that people who accumulate wealth probably shouldn't get as much more as they do. But more productive people should get more stuff. Like that's, I think, a good principle for producing a productive society. But I don't get to decide at the end of the day. It's really the rough structure of Panvala is a federation of communities who govern this movement.
Amazing. So one thing that's I've always appreciated about your approach to things and about the language you use, the stories that you tell, is that they allow, when you really listen, for the space for nuance. So for instance, this rather dark thing that you said earlier, that's the easiest thing is for us just to get rich together. It's so interesting because the shift in narrative there is so small. It's just to say that the only way we get rich is together, rather than the easiest thing, right? And it's these kind of like nuanced narrative shifts that are so interesting, both in the way that Panvala is structured, the things that fall out of that, like for instance the fact that like your key metric is total value allocated rather than total value locked. I love that about like the way that these systems the emergent order that they end up having. But this particular thing of like nuanced discussion and the ability to see the shift that like we use different words to mean different things, and like even in our own lives, I'm a communist with my family, a socialist with my friends, a capitalist with the wider world that I don't personally relate with. And when we have the space to see that, it's just these like little shifts. And even like in this kind of landscape of sort of increasing maximas, we see that like speculation is not separate from the final global maximum of healthy community life. Speculation in and of itself, even as a financial instrument, is interesting because it's like real risk and it allocates liquidity to interesting futures. But there's also like these multivalent meanings to the term, like speculative fiction. You can imagine Bitcoin or Ethereum as these speculative sci-fis that are looking into the possible means of organization and pulling those that are more communal, more based on common knowledge, like into the present. And I'm really, really fascinated by the application that this kind of nuanced dialogue can have in terms of helping us discover shared purpose through reciprocity. And it's so interesting to me because every time I hear you talk, it's like, we love agency. We want people to be able to do their own things. This is really about like you, and embedded in that is the implicit assumption that human beings are kind of good, right? That like they will tend toward meaning and value over time. They will tend toward more purposeful activities. And I wonder if you can just talk a little bit more about that and about this notion that the only way we get rich is together, right? Not let's get rich together. It's the only way is to be together, right? And that was like this old, like, you look at indigenous philosophies all over the world, right? Like when the French and the English came to America, for instance, seeing as this is where you're based, you know, like the Native Americans were like, y'all are poor, right? You're poor because you lack generosity to one another. It's not about material items. You just don't see this thing of reciprocity, right? And you don't see that, like, you can enshrine as a constitutional ideal free speech or freedom of movement, but then you force people to pay for travel and accommodation, so nobody's actually free to move. Whereas we have this thing of like obligation to hospitality for strangers, such that if I want to leave my home, I absolutely can go, because like I know that wherever I go, I will be welcomed, because that is the cultural precedent. So we're all actually free to move, but we don't need the enshrined constitutional good, right? It's about this like nuanced understanding of how we move through the world and how we recognize our richness together, as a way of like living a purposeful life. And I see that reflected in so much of what you say, and I wonder what you think about purpose and these implicit assumptions about the goodness of human beings.
Yeah, so like I would say, like, I love human beings. Like I think humanity is the greatest show on earth. Like we are spectacular. We have achieved great things. Like everything that I see other human beings do delights me. Like to get a little bit wooey about it. Like I see God in every one of you. Like you're awesome. But while I used to think that humans were generally good, every once in a while your life changes. You might come across like a narcissist or something, and you might see, oh, like some people are just like bad in ways that they can't even necessarily control, bad in ways that doesn't really have their own inherent logic that you would agree with. It's like, what does this even do for you? Like some people are bad. So like it's not that I think that we innately tend towards the good. It's more that I think that giving people agency lets the show of humanity play out the way that it's going to play out. Like trying to steer people to use resources in the most productive way possible, by my opinions, I think actually stifles what we are capable of doing. Because again, that requires consensus, that requires agreement. We have to agree on what's the most important thing to do. So I think that if you just eliminate that and say, no, like as long as you're doing things with your community, that your community is consuming together, that you can just do that. And my opinion doesn't matter. Like, I don't think that all communities are going to do good things. I think many are going to do wasteful things that everyone will look back on and be like, oh, you just shouldn't have done that. And it was foreseeable that you shouldn't have done that. I think all that's going to happen. And the only things that we should actually try to stop are things that are actively harmful to other people. Like you can't harm other people, but you can waste. If you want to waste, go waste. Like that's up to, like, I don't think that we're inherently good. But I do think that the show of humanity is spectacular, and letting people waste is part of that show, in my opinion. But like, the other part of that was there's two parts of that. Like humans are inherently good, and there's a second part that was interesting and I wanted to riff on.
Only being rich together, and the notion of
only being rich together.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, by training, I am a software engineer. So like very quickly as a software engineer, like you make enough in salary where like the problems that you might have foreseen growing up as a kid, like those all go away pretty quickly. And what you're left with is the problems that money can't solve. Like, why is my society crumbling? Like you can't, no matter how rich I am, I can't buy a well-functioning society. I can't buy trains that run on time. I can't buy social trust. Instead, I live in a society where people are suspicious of people who aren't like them. Like you very quickly get to the things that you can't buy. All those things we can buy, like we can have the resources to produce, but we can only get them together. We can only get like cures for diseases together. I can't buy that on my own. We can only get like just a vibrant culture together. I can't buy that on my own. Like the people, the more focus that people have on individual wealth, the more they're short selling the possible worlds they can dream of. Because if you imagine communities actually getting wealthier, communities having more resources to spend collectively, like the stuff that you get is going to be way better. Like you as an individual are going to consume a much better experience in your life if your community is richer than if just you are richer. Like there's only so much that you need as an individual, and then you run out of stuff that you run out of iPhones to buy, you run out of plane flights, you run out of like fancy trips, like you run out of that stuff, but you don't run out of wanting things to be better that again you just can't buy on your own. So like to me it's not like the framing that I have isn't like a sort of do-gooder framing where it's like, oh, I just want other people to benefit, I don't care about me. No, I care about me. I want stuff, but the stuff that I want I can't get by myself, I need all of you. So like that is really like again, it's a story that our existing system can't tell very well, because the things that require all of us, we put government into that story over and over. And again, due to inefficiencies, due to our political system that inherently divides us against one another, like those stories end up being unappealing. But if the story we tell about the things that we share are about communities that we've chosen, communities of people we actually like spending time with them, we like making decisions with them. And if we didn't, we would have chosen another community. When that becomes our story about the things that we do together, like are the possible worlds that not just I dream of, but everybody dreams of, they're going to get richer, they're going to get better, they're going to be more vivid, they're going to have more things at their disposal than just fancier phones, fancier cars. They're going to have more purpose, more ambition, more things that they can achieve together and live their lives in a way that I think produces meaning for them all. Again, many communities won't choose that, but I think most communities will. And I just like literally just being able to expand what you can dream of from having that better story. It's like, okay, my community is going to have more resources to do what we want. It's not about the government. It's about what we can do in a shared way, but voluntarily. Like that is the thing that unlocks, I think, the ability to dream of a world that I think is pretty cool. Like again, not a utopia. It's not going to be a perfect world. There's going to be communities doing stuff that it's like, oh, I wish they would stop doing that thing. I really don't like it, but they're doing it anyway. Like there's going to be some of that, but I think a lot of stuff. I think a lot of people are going to get so much more of what they want because again, so much of what we want we can't get on our own. So if we can get what we want together without having that together be literally 300 million people or 7 billion people or whatever. Like, I think we're just going to get a lot more stuff.
Almost time for Q&A. Andy, if you have anything else. Otherwise, we will have some questions. We'll ask folks if they're willing to unmute. So have for Niran. Niran, we'll just keep it rolling. It's not a goodbye yet. You can't leave. So let's see. Okay, so I pinged a couple people on DMs. Katie, if you would like, we could start with you.
Yeah. Hi, this is like a really amazing philosophical conversation. And a lot of the things that I noticed that as we're trying to build things in society, the end kind of design and user that we keep coming back to is humans and people. And we've been so focused on people in designing, the future. Where does sentient beings, animals, the planet, the earth, how do those fit in as other users in this as maybe a higher order opportunity to solve for and work with and keep as a North Star? So I'm curious as to how you see that in this design.
Yeah, so I don't have like a philosophical answer that balances, non-human actors. Like I do think that's a problem that we're gonna have to solve eventually, but in my thinking it's like humans shape the world more or less. Where this is the game that I'm thinking about. I think that there many individual human beings very much value the ecosystem that sustains us, values even the things that don't sustain us, but just the other life on Earth. There are many communities that deeply value that. And again, most of the things that allow our ecosystem to degrade, that allow things to get worse in that way, are really like, we don't have the resources to push back against extraction. Like when people are saying, hey, I'm gonna like be able to run all my factories because I'm just gonna like spew carbon into the air, and even worse pollutants than that, like if you can get your government to stop it, great. But then what if you can't get your government to stop it? Like literally with carbon, we can't get our government to stop people from polluting. Like, and again, it's a very hard problem. It's not like, oh, the government should literally just flip a switch, because again, like we consume things that require putting carbon in there. It's a very hard problem. But again, if you had agency at a different level, where we could collectively make decisions about the actions that we're going to take in a community level rather than at a government level, I think it would be easier to push back on those things, because you wouldn't have to get everybody to do it, but it also wouldn't be an individual thing. I can individually try to reduce my carbon footprint, but nobody's really watching me. Also, I love plane flights. Oh man, plane flights are amazing. But they're the worst thing. I'm incinerating the earth every time I go to an exact destination. I get it. So like the more we can push things to rather being individual decisions, to be like, as a community, we do this. If I post my images from the beach on Instagram, but my community has been like, hey, like to not incinerate earth, we only go to, like, I live in Texas, we only go to Galveston, the worst beach ever. So your pictures from that beautiful beach show that you're incinerating earth. We don't really approve of that. Like the more we can shift things to kind of be not just individual, but a little bit more collective, but it's still communities that we're choosing. Maybe at the end of the day, I'm like, hey, my community keeps on like shitting on me because I like nice beaches. I'm going to join a different community where I can incinerate earth and go to those nice beaches. That might be something I do. But many communities will be able to kind of sustain that sort of those values that can preserve the things that we really care about. And I think at the end of the day, especially as things get more, virtual, as people care more about what's going online than what's going on outside the door, like the more we can build into our values, like the world outside matters, like nature matters, our ecosystem matters, like that the reason that people end up putting their resources to preserve that will be not because of self-interest, but because literally that's their way of life. Like that's the way of life of the community that they've chosen to be a part of. We preserve Earth. Like if you actually had the resources to make that be part of your way of life, I think a lot of people would do it.
Beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you, Katie, for your question. We'll go to Maya and then Ray.
Hi, everyone. Niran, thanks so much for being here. This has been an amazing chat, and I'm like galvanized and want to write and like do all these things to explore all the ideas we've been talking about today. My question was kind of around a couple of things, like the really fundamental things about incentive building, values alignment, and kind of where we get our ideas around what humans need to function in society. Kind of brought up, using Maslow's hierarchy of needs as a really easy way to determine what types of projects in crypto we should build first, or the type of world we want to imagine first. So instead of let's all get rich, it becomes let's all solve hunger first, let's all create safety first, let's all do shelter first. Or even taking a look more at like the permanent level of happiness, I think is a really great framework for taking a look at how humans feel fulfilled. What I'm seeing is kind of this bifurcation in the space between builders who are building for a better society with those things in mind, and then builders who are building, I don't want to call anyone's project superfluous, because I think there's value in just trying a lot of different things out. But I wonder, like, what's your take on meaningful projects, superfluous projects, projects just for the sake of being out there? Like, yeah, really curious about those things and how you envision incentives playing a role in what we end up using in the future.
Yeah, I think incentives are a big deal. I think incentives are really like one of the key things unlocked by being able to use blockchain technology to organize people. Like when like a lot of people are trying to find new things to build with blockchains that unlock some sort of new capability. And I think all those things have actually already been built. Again, this is just my opinion, but I think the only two things you need to reshape the world are tokens and NFTs. So that's it. Like if you think about any video game you've played, a lot of them have like some sort of currency that you have, and then you have your inventory of items. Tokens are your currency, NFTs are your inventory of items. That's all you need to build with. Everything already exists. It's just like to me, the question is, what do you do with that, more or less? So I do think incentives are a big deal. So the stories that people are telling around the things that they're building on top of that, a lot of them are really just, some of them are like, hey, this is going to make a lot of money, come be a part of this. A lot of them do have some sort of deeper meaning built into it. But the hard part is that even if someone is saying that their project has some deeper meaning into it, that doesn't mean that that's true. Like at the end of the day, like it's so like while many things are like, oh, like me and my community are going to make decisions about this, so much is based on your own personal values about what you think is important and how you measure that over time. Because again, you can be part of a community that says they're making the world a better place for decades, and at the end of the day just end up having thrown great parties for you and your community, and maybe that was the thing all along. So it's really hard to judge projects by how much of a meaning they profess to have, because the more we do that, the more people will just fake it till they make it. Which again, like I don't think that's the end of the world. I try to do as little judging as possible with how other people use their time on Earth, with how other people use this special once in a lifetime opportunity with a blank slate sort of social economic technology. Like people are doing all sorts of things, and I'm like, go do that. To me, the most important thing, regardless of how much meaning people imbue their work with, is how much people are using it. So even if somebody is building something that I think is not perfect, like if it has users, I'm excited about it. In particular, the corner of the Ethereum ecosystem that I spend the most time in is the DAO ecosystem. And a lot of people have all these very strong opinions about what a DAO should be, what is a DAO, what isn't, etc. And again, like you can judge things by that sort of lens, or you can say, well, are people there? Are people using it? Like that to me is the yardstick, because again, the main thing is movement. Like you have to get to get to any place, you have to be moving to start with. It's not the meaning and value angle can turn into talk so easily that like it's really just what is actually practical. And especially in the DAO space, there are lots of people who have beliefs that are totally impractical, that make no sense. If you've ever been in a Discord or in a forum for a DAO, people have opinions that are wrong all the time. And it's just the nature of the game. Like so many people came into it from a very ideological perspective about how things should work. And ideology so often, when it comes time to hit the road and get things done, falls apart. And I think a lot of that is in the process of happening in the DAO space, where people are like, well, how do we actually get things done? So again, like people using something, to me is the biggest thing. And whether or not people are doing something that's super meaningful, to me, I try not to care so much. I want to give people the tools to that kind of naturally shift the work that people want to do in a more meaningful direction. So it shouldn't, like if my work personally succeeds, it shouldn't matter what people are doing, because they'll have the toolkit, they'll have the incentives that lead to meaningful things for them by default. Like it shouldn't be a struggle to do meaningful things. It shouldn't feel like, oh, just push yourself a little bit harder to do that meaningful thing. Like that, it shouldn't be pushing against the grain. It should be pushing with it. And when we get there, I think it'll look a little more obvious.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. Okay, we may have to go a bit more quick fire. 15 minutes left, and then we have optional time and gather after. Ray, why don't we start with you, and then we keep going. Thank you, Maya. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you, Niran. Thank you for being here, and good to see you again. We met at a workshop at the end of the Funding the Commons session here in New York back in June about funding public goods, and I took an instant liking to Niran as we went through that workshop. It was awesome. So my question is really quick and simple. I heard you say, sing essentially the praises of capitalism, and many people in the chat were aghast, but there is a sense in which I agree. And the reason that I agree and the logic for agreement is this basic notion of the logic capitalism is that we should create more than the resources that we use to do so. And that is what extends the resources of society and human capability. Later on, you said, you know what, people should waste things, go ahead and waste. Wastefulness is fine, or something to that effect. And for me, those two really contradict each other quite strongly. And so I'm wondering how you reconcile that particular contradiction. Thank you.
That's a great question and a great framing. So I think you're right. In capitalism, like waste is kind of not okay. The more you waste, the quicker you're not going to be part of capitalism anymore. Your enterprise will disappear from Earth the more you waste. So that's definitely true. But think about right now we think of like the public sector and the private sector when we're framing our productive activities. And the private sector, waste very quickly gets filtered out by market dynamics. There's still plenty of waste in the private sector, but it's limited to what your competitors are wasting. If you waste much more than your competitors, you're going to go out of business. In the public sector, you can waste all you want. And again, I'm not anti-government. It's just, it is what it is. Tons of waste happens all over the place, and there is no limit to it. The limit is, will people vote you out of power if you waste too much? And the answer is no, they won't. In most cases, they won't. So if you think of those two sectors as the main themes organizing our society, and you think of the community sector as something that's emerging, the community sector ends up having attributes of both. Like again, if your community wastes too much, and people stop wanting to join it because it's not producing what they want to be part of as a community, then your community will stop existing. But if people like joining a community that's wasting, that can exist for a very long time, because to them, that doesn't feel like waste. Again, throwing ragers all the time, to me, looks like waste. But will people show up? I think people will show up for quite some time. So to them, it's not waste. To them, it's like, I'm showing up for the
Okay, Ru.
So I think in that context, things that look like waste can continue for a long time. So you end up having but again, you don't want to waste forever. You don't want to waste, especially in the axis of your community's actual mission, because if somebody else starts their own community and they're like, look how much more we're doing with the resources, you should join ours instead, you will lose like you would in the private sector. So I agree, waste is bad, but it just there's more wiggle room in terms of wasting, because waste to me isn't necessarily waste to other people. In a business, waste is just waste. It's very easy to see waste in a business. In the public sector and in the community sector, it's just harder to see.
Thank you for that. There are other answers, and so I'll offer an opinion of my own. Is that many times a lot of investment is made into organizations that then fail. And one way to look at that is that was a waste of money. But another way to look at it is that it funded people to do things, and therefore they engaged in practices, invented technologies, developed skills, and that wasn't really a waste. And so many times what's a waste really just fundamentally depends on what you value. And that's maybe like not really the problem with capitalism, but a problem with our accounting system in terms of what we decide to account for and value, and what we disaccount and for and don't value. Thanks again.
Ray, thank you so much. I want to give us one thing to end the call with, which is a surprise and joyful appearance by a good friend and another person on that Mount Rushmore list that I described. Vitalik Buterin is here for a few short words.
Hello, hello everyone. How are you?
We're good. Congrats on the merge. Congrats.
Yeah, I know. Congrats to all of you. This has been, a great long 8 years for the ecosystem, and it's so amazing to see all of our hard work on proof of stake finally come to fruition.
Amazing.
Yeah.
How are you feeling? How are you doing?
Relieved, I guess. I'm, just happy that the whole thing went through, and no big problems. Just a nice successful transition, and Ethereum's finally a pure proof of stake system.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Yeah. No news is good news. And we have Niran here, who's been in the ecosystem since 2015. Niran, I wonder if you have any questions or feelings that you would like to express on this day, things that are with you as you look to the present of Ethereum, the new product, and the future. Niran, if you have any questions or any thoughts for Vitalik, but really it's just celebration.
Yeah, for me, like the biggest question is where things go from here, because I feel like so much of the potential of like using Ethereum for pro-social things has been blocked by the environmental impacts of proof of work. So now that that's kind of behind us, like what kind of new opportunities do you see opening up from that argument kind of being off the table? Like what kinds of new people can we reach? What kinds of new applications can we make happen as a result?
Yeah, no, very, very good question. I mean, I think definitely like a lot more institutional adoption from all kinds of people. Like I've talked to even a bunch of different tech companies, for example, that think sort of Reddit type people, but more of those. Like I've talked to some that are like, hey, we would love to do more crypto things, but we just have a lot of people internally who are really against the energy waste aspect. And like, I think it's even easy to underestimate the number of people who are like that, just because generally, yeah, like if you're not going to do something as a company, you would generally just keep quiet, right? Like there's no reason to pointlessly kind of just say like, hey, we're not doing this. So a lot of those are going to be more willing to do Ethereum things in the future. Going out, I mean, obviously just lots of local governments everywhere. I mean, going outside of the US, and there's definitely just all kinds of global South countries, small island nations, and those that both like have a lot of need for blockchain based things, so whether it's some identity layer or just financial infrastructure or whatever else, because they're not very well connected to existing stuff, but they're also extremely concerned about climate change issues, because like they personally are going to be hit the hardest by that over the next 50 to 100 years. And the merge will definitely make it easy for them to participate in and really encourage Ethereum and blockchain based solutions with a clear conscience. So I think many kinds of people ultimately And I mean, if obviously the other thing is that the merge and the switch to proof of stake really lays the stage for all of the other upgrades that we're going to do, right? Like I think the main thing that people complain about regarding blockchains, aside from the proof of work aspect, is that they can be expensive and have high fees. And like, guess what? Like sharding and everything is all about fixing that. And the switch to proof of stake in a lot of ways is about laying the foundation for those kinds of upgrades, right? So that's something that, like, it's not technically connected to proof of stake, but it's just a really important stepping stone on the way. And in a lot of ways, like I would say, the more than half of the work in at least a basic sharding solution of some kind is done already at this point. So I'm looking forward to the rest of that being done too.
Incredible. We have one last question, but Vitalik, you get some rest. The question is just, what have you learned about yourself basically through this process? How have you felt about your leadership style, the way that you guide the community? And I think this is one of the questions is, Ethereum is a community of communities. So like how you think about communal space, basically.
It's hard to say. Like sometimes it's hard to tell apart what I've learned versus what changed, right? Like Ethereum as a community has just changed such a huge amount over the last 8 years. Like it really has turned into a community of communities in a way that it really wasn't back in 2015. And it's this really diverse group with all of these little sub bubbles, whether it's the Gitcoin bubble or the Bankless bubble or kind of every one of the individual local communities. There's all of these different Ethereum groups that sometimes have barely even heard of each other, but that are all doing their own, often very things. And that's, I mean, it's great. I think it's great that, like Ethereum community has all of the, like every dimension of diversity. And, but at the same time, it does mean that like the role changes and that the role, like my own role changes, the role of the Ethereum Foundation changes. I mean, my own role within the Ethereum Foundation changes just because the Ethereum Foundation itself is getting bigger throughout this whole process. So it's definitely been a challenging experience to have to adapt to this, right? Like there's a lot less that I can do personally, for example, today compared to 5 years ago. And the like the valuable stuff that I do is less about doing things myself and more about kind of laying out the ideas and the groundwork for bigger groups of other people to do things. And that's been, and it's a transition that's inevitable as the scale of the ecosystem increases, but it has been something that I have had to learn to adapt to.
I mean, yeah, the 8 years ago, the first blog post on the ethereum.org blog about proof of stake, and today is a big day. It's gone from blog post to reality, and you've always done that. There's been posts, and the way that your blog is used, I think, is going to be studied in history books, because instead of papers, you just put your ideas out there and you allow people to spend time with them. And so thank you for spending time with us. Congrats on the merge, September 15th, 2022, depending on where you were in the world. And congrats, Vitalik. Thank you for being with us at the launch of Kernel Block 7. Really means a lot.
Amazing. I hope you guys have had a great event. And congrats again on the merge to everyone.
Congrats. Thank you. All right, I'll hop into Cafe Kernel for a bit. Thanks, V. See you.
See you.
Bye-bye. All right. Niran, thank you. Thank you so much. It's meaningful to have people who have been with us since 2015, but I also want to point out to Vitalik's point that, this is the point of Kernel to me, is that it changes my perspective every single time. This is what Niran said. It's a group of people that comes from all parts of that 8-year journey. And in many ways, the histories and stories that we all share with each other are much broader and bigger than Ethereum. And that's always been our hope with Kernel, is that it's a space that has a freshness of ideas. And that freshness is derived from a sense of history. if there was one thing to share, it might be the Panvala origin story and the meaning behind that word in the river before we hopped. But regardless, Niran, you know, you've always been that for us. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Did you want me to go into the meaning of it?
Why don't I play a quick song while we transition to Gather? Stick around if you're willing, Niran, and for whoever who wants to stay, they can listen to that story. Thank you all. We'll see you in Gather if you want to hang out over there. And we'll see you all soon for Colonel Regardless.
By the grace of your strength, we are home.